Sech Sukkah Perek Gimel. Just a quick hakdama to the Perek because we're going to be discussing the mitzvah of Talad Minim and everything that it entails. Hopefully, Torah state L'kachtem lechem b'yom harishon prietz hadar kapos tomorrow v'anafetz avos v'arvei nachal usmachtem l'fnei Hashem lekechem shivas yom. You should take for yourself on the first day, which is referring to the first day of Sukkot, a fruit of a beautiful tree, branches of date palms, a shoot of the plaited tree, that would be the hadassim, and Arvei Nachal, the willows of a brook, that would be the aravas. Usmachtam l'fnei Hashem lekechem shivas yomim. You should rejoice before Hashem, your God, for a 7-day period. Here, the Torah commands us to perform on Sukkot the mitzvah of taking the Daled Minim, which is the Etzrig, which is the Prietz Hadar, the Kapos Tamorim is the Lulav, Anafetz Avos is Hadassim, and Arvei Nachal is Aravas. The basic chiyuv is simply to take hold of one lulav, one esrog, 3 hadassim, and 2 aravas. The ideal way to perform the mitzvah is that after one ties the lulav, hadassim, and aravas together, one takes the bundle in the right hand and the esrog in the left, and waves them in all 4 directions of the compass and up and down, as will be discussed in Mishnah Ches and Tes. We do know from, I believe it's from the Rikanti, that he had a dream, or one of his rebbeim, or somebody had a dream that he saw the Shem Havaya with the last hay floating further away from the first 3 letters of the name, first 3 letters of Hashem's name. And the explanation given was that he was holding the esrig farther away from the daled minim. We have to hold it together to be mashlam all these daled minim, to be masakim, whatever these tikkunim are. In Bizman HaMikdash, the mitzvah applied, the mitzvah deraisa applied on all 7 days of Sukkot. But outside the Beis HaMikdash, the chiyuv applied only on the first day of L'kachtem lechem yom harishon. After the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, the Chachamim were geyser that the mitzvah would be performed everywhere on all days of Yom Tov except for Shabbos to commemorate as a Seichel LaMikdash. In order to be valid for the mitzvah, the Daled Minim must meet specific requirements, some of which are listed in the first part of this parak. Most belong to 3 categories. Number 1, one must own the species in order to fulfill his obligation and not be borrowed or certainly not stolen. Number 2, they must be whole, undamaged, and of a certain size. And number 3, each must possess its own unique halachic standard of hadar. Some of these requirements are only on the first day of Sukkot, when the mitzvah is a mitzvah deraisa. There's a lot of details here, and I hope we'll try to be kaidul as much as we can. Mishnah Aleph. Lulav hagozal hayavesh pasal. A stolen lulav or a dry one is no good. This is learnt out from the pasuk in the Torah that one cannot fulfill the mitzvah except with the lulav that he owns. Dichsivu l'kachtem lechem, misha lechem. It has to belong to you. And it has to be after Yush, meaning that the owner, the original owner, has given up. There's a second reason why a stolen lulav may not be used. Using such a lulav is a mitzvah brought about through an avera, a mitzvah bab avera, which is not a valid fulfillment of the mitzvah. Sometimes it is only the second reason that applies. If the owner of the stolen lulav despairs he was miyayish of ever getting it back, it becomes a property of the gazlan, the one who stole it, who need only repay its monetary value. In that case, the first reason would be irrelevant since the person who stole the lulav now owns it. The second reason, however, would still apply because it's still considered a mitzvah haba ba'avera. V'hayavesh, a dry lulav is not halachically considered to be beautiful. The Torah refers to an esrog as beautiful, which we quoted in the Akdama to this parak, and the other 3 species are compared to the esrog in this respect, as we state in the Gemara. Therefore, if any of the 4 species lack beauty, if it's missing hadar, it's no good. A lulav is defined as dry if most of its leaves or its spine have lost their green color or turned white due to the lack of moisture. Now, we do have stories where, let's say in Europe or during times of war, when people didn't have lulav, they would go up to the attic of the shul and take down a lulav that they used the year before and use it again. Doesn't say anywhere. I don't believe that it says anywhere that you have to have a new one each year. But if the pshat is that your esrog got so dried out, or your lulav got so dried out that it's going to be nichlal in yavesh, so then it's no good. Obviously, but if it's not yavesh, so then b'daychik you can use it. Shel Asherah shel Ir Hanidachas Pasal. The lulav of an Asherah, which is a tree that was worshipped as Avodah Zarah, or a Ir Hanidachas, which is a town of idol worshippers, is no good. If most of the residents of a town in Eretz Yisrael become over the Avodah Zarah, it is judged to become an Ir Hanidachas. The Avdi Avodah Zarah are put to death, and the property of the entire town is burnt. And a Asherah tree and its produce must also be burnt. So even if it's not burnt, being the Sreifa Koi, it's going to get burnt. If a lulav must be burnt, it's considered as though it has already been burnt and reduced to ashes. As such, it lacks the necessary length that is required for a valid lulav. It's missing the lulav by shear. Lulav needs to have a certain size. But these, being that it was a sreifa kaimi, it's like this ashes, and it doesn't have a shear. Nikdam roishai, if a lulav whose top was cut off, a lulav whose tip is clipped is not beautiful, it's missing hadar. A lulav has a thick green cord called a spine that runs along its length. Long thin leaves grow out of the sides and top of the spine, overlapping each other. The top of the lulav refers to the leaves that rise above the spine, whether they grow out of the top of the spine or its sides. If the tips of most of these leaves are cut off, so then the lulav is no good. Or nifritzu olav, if most of its leaves are torn off, it is pasul. The leaves were completely removed and the entirety of the lulav, such a lulav is pasul because it's missing hadar. Nifritzu olav, if its leaves are spread apart like the branches of a tree, but they were attached to the lulav, it's good. As a palm branch matures, its leaves spread apart like the branches of a tree and harden. It is nevertheless valid according to the Tanakama, provided that the ends of the spread leaves can be tied down so that the leaves lie against the spine. It's not necessary to actually tie them. The fact that they can be tied is good enough. Rabbi Yehuda says, in order for such a lulav to be kosher, one must bind the leaves together at the top of the lulav so that they lie against the spine, and it would look like the lulavim that we use today. Rabbi Yehuda holds that a lulav is not kosher unless the leaves actually lie against the spine. If they do not lie against it, then they must be tied. Sinei Hara Barzel, lulavim from the palms of Hara Barzel, which was a name of a place in Eretz Yisrael, whose leaves are very short and sparse. So it's ksheres, they're good. The leaves of this type of lulav are relatively short, are few in number, and far from one each other. It's valid if the tip of each leaf reaches one above it. Lulav sheyesh by shleisha tvachim k'dei l'nanei by kosher. A lulav that has the length of 3 tvachim, which is the minimum length of the hadatzim and aravas that are bound together with it, plus another tefach above the hadatzim and aravas with which to wave it, it is valid. One is mechuyev to wave the lulav together with the other minim when initially taking them to perform the mitzvah and in the course of reciting Hallel, as we'll see at the end of the parak. Thus, a lulav must be at least 4 tvachim long from its base to the top of its spine, and hadatzim and aravas need to be at least 3 tvachim long. Mishnah Beis, hadas hagozel hayavesh pasul. A stolen hadas or a dry one is no good. Shel asherah shel ira nidachas pasul. A hadas of an asherah or an ira nidachas is also no good. Although these disqualifications were already mentioned in connection with the lulav, they're repeated with respect to the hadas, arava, and esrig, since each of the species has its own unique disqualifications which do not apply to any of the others. The Tana deals with each species separately. Nikdam roishai nifritzu olav oishahayu anavav merubas me olav pasul. A hadas whose top was cut off, which refers to the top of the stem and not to the leaves. Right? I think the Yerushalmi by the lulav says that lehamesim yehalaluka, and it can't be missing the top, because the dead people don't sing praise to Hashem, and we know the lulav is gematria chayim, so it has to be good. Nifritzu olav, or it has most of its leaves torn off. Ashayu anavav merubas me olav, or it has more berries than leaves. It's no good. What's this talking about? Hadassim often sprout small dark berries. A hadas with more berries than leaves has a speckled look, and it's missing part of the hodar. This psul applies only when the berries are black or red. If they are green, the hadas has the beauty because it's natural color and it's fine. V'miatan kshera, but if one made its berries less numerous than its leaves by plucking some of them off, then it's kosher. However, one may not make the berries less numerous than its leaves by plucking them on yantiv, because that would be similar to repairing a utensil, which would be asur on yantiv. Since the presence of the berries passes the hadas, one who removes them is being misakin. Mishnah Gimel. Arava gzula v'yavesha psula. An arava that was stolen or that's dried out is pasul. Now we know aravas get dried out really quick. Shel asherav shel ira nidachas pasul. An arava and an asherav, to use the weeping willow tree for an avodah zarah, or there was a willow tree in an ira nidachas, it would be no good. Nikdam roisha nifritzu aleha vehatzavtzifa psula. And a rava whose top was cut off, which is the top of the stem, not the leaves, or has most of its leaves torn off, or a tzavtzifa, which is an arava whose leaves are round, it's no good. It's learned from the Torah that tzavtzifa is no good. Kemusha, if a arava is merely withered rather than completely dry, visha nashu mikdas aleha, or if some of its leaves fell off, vishal ba'al, or if it's from a field that's watered by the rain and didn't grow by a brook, kshera, it's kosher. Not only an arava, but also a lulav hadas and esrig that are merely withered and not completely dry are valid, as we spoke before in Mishnah Aleph by lulav hayavish. This law is stated explicitly only regarding the arava, because one might have thought that since an arava is described as growing by a brook, it's not acceptable unless it retains all of its moisture, and that would explain the halacha of v'shel ba'al also. The Mishnah says that some of its leaves fell off. To clarify, when this and the previous two Mishnahs said that a species whose leaves were torn off is invalid, that meant that most of the leaves were torn off, and not just some of them. This clarification is said here and not in the earlier Mishnayos because the arava is the last of the three to which it applies. Now, Shel Baal, the Torah says that it has to be Arvei Nachal, but the truth is an arava is valid even if it didn't grow by a brook. The pasuk is just speaking of the usual situation that really all of them, the Gemara says, really all of them are G'dei Mal Kol Mayim. They will grow by the water, and that's why on Sukkos we take this mitzvah, these four items, these four plants that grow by the water, to be mispalel on the water, and that's why we shake them in all four directions. We wave them in all four directions, all six directions, to lahafsik tzlalim rav. The Gemara says, and to chase away the bad winds and bad rains, and to bring in good dew and good rains and good winds, to have hatzlacha with the produce of the coming year. Mishnah Daled, Rabbi Shmuel says, Shloisha hadasim ushtei aravot lulav echad ve'esrig echad. The mitzvah is to take 3 hadasim, 2 aravos, 1 lulav, and 1 esrig. Afilu shnayim ketumim ve'echad eino katum. The hadasim are valid even if 2 of them are clipped, meaning the tops are cut off, and 1 is not clipped. The Gemara asks why Rabbi Shmuel allows 2 clipped hadasim and not 3. After all, if a clipped hadas is kosher, then all 3 could be clipped and still. And if it's not valid, then even 1 shouldn't be kosher. The Gemara answers that Rabbi Shmuel considers the clipped hadas invalid, but he changed his mind about the number of hadasim required. At first he held that 3 hadasim are necessary, but later he ruled that 1 hadas is enough. However, he did not withdraw his original statement. Instead, he modified it by saying that 2 of the 3 hadasim may be clipped, and then no good, because a single hadas is good enough. Reb Tarfon says, Afilu shloshtem ketumim, 1 fulfills the mitzvah even if all 3 of the hadasim are clipped. Reb Tarfon rules that a hadas is valid even if it's clipped, because in his opinion the hadas is still hodar. That hodar does not apply by hadasim. Regarding the number of hadasim, he holds 3 are necessary, as Rabbi Shmuel ruled originally. It's just interesting because the Gemara refers to tzaddikim. The Gemara calls tzaddikim hadasim. Esther was Hadassah, and the Gemara talks about the union of beauty by Hadassah. It's just interesting that Tarfon holds that it doesn't need Hadar. Rabbi Kiva Aimer Kshem Shalulav Echad ve'Esrig Echad Kachadas Echad ve'Arava Echas. Rabbi Kiva says that just as one needs only 1 lulav and 1 esrig, so too one needs only 1 hadas and 1 arava, and this 1 hadas may not be clipped. Now, obviously, we don't hold like Rabbi Kiva; we hold like Rabbi Tarfon over here. Okay. Mishnah Hey, esrig hagoz yavesh, a stolen esrig or a dry one is no good. Shel asherav shel iranidachas puzzle, and as esrig of an ashera or iranidachas is no good. Shel arla, an esrig of arla is no good, is puzzle because it may not be eaten. Shel truma tmea puzzle, and an esrig of truma that's tamei is also no good for the same reason. Arla is a fruit of a tree within its first 3 years. Having benefit from such a tree is asur midiraisa. Truma, we know, is one of the portions that have to be separated from the produce grown in Eretz Yisrael, and it must be given to a kohen to be eaten only by Kehanim and the members of his household. If it becomes tamei, it may not be eaten by anyone, and it has to be burnt. And just like we said before, they have to get rid of it. They have to get rid of it. It has the isser on it. And Truma Tamea is pasul. It's learned up from a pasuk in the Torah that the daled minim are not valid for the mitzvah unless they're fit to be used in their usual way. Therefore, the esrog which is normally eaten is kosher only if eating it's mutter. For this reason, an esrog of arla and an esrog of truma that's tameh are disqualified since they may not be eaten. We shall truma tahira, but an esrog of truma that's tahar lo yita, one shouldn't take it because he might make it capable of becoming tameh, which is aser. The Torah is mechayev us to protect truma from becoming tameh, as we spoke by Arichas. Mesech the trumas. The Chachamim were geyser, therefore, by answering us from using an esrog of truma for the mitzvah, because water from the lulav, which was kept in water to maintain its freshness, might drip on it, which would make it capable of becoming tameh. Produce cannot become tameh unless it was first moistened with water or one of the other of the zayin mashkes. V'im not al kosher, but if he took it, it is good. Meaning, if he took an esrog shel truma, it is good. Because even if a Yisrael can't eat it, but it's edible, it's mutter to a kohen. Shel demai. An esrog of demai. Demai is produce of Eretz Yisrael obtained from an unlearned person, an ama aretz. It might be tevel, which means that no truma or meiser has been separated from it, because some ama aretz didn't separate meiser. To prevent people from possibly eating tevel, which is isur midiraisa, Chachamim or geyser, the one wants to remove meiser from the demai before eating it. Midiraisa, the demai is mutter in any event, because most ama aretz do separate meiser from their produce. So if you have an esrog of demai, so Beishamai Paisel and Beisil Machshir, Beishamai rule that it's no good because they hold that demai may not be eaten by anyone. Beisil Machshir and Beisil rule that it is kosher because in their opinion demai may be eaten by a poor person. Since poor people are allowed to eat demai without taking off meiser, an esrog of meiser is fit to be eaten. Shal meiser sheni b'Yerushalayim, an esrog of meiser sheni inside Yerushalayim. Meiser sheni is another one of the portions that must be separated from the produce grown in Eretz Yisrael. The owners are required to eat it in Yerushalayim or exchange it for money, which he takes to Yerushalayim and uses it to buy food to be eaten over there. That one shouldn't take it because he might make it capable of becoming tameh, which is aser. Not al kosher, but if he did take it, it is kosher. The halacha we mentioned earlier applies not only to truma, but to meiser sheni also, to make sure that it doesn't become tameh. In fact, one is also to use an esrog of meiser sheni for the mitzvah, even outside Yerushalayim, because we're afraid that it might make it tameh. The Mishnah mentions Yerushalayim only because of the following halacha. An esrog of meiser sheni is kosher for the mitzvah only inside Yerushalayim, where it could be eaten outside Yerushalayim. But meiser sheni is aser to everyone. The esrog would be no good. Mishnah Vav. Also, chazazis al rubai. A deformity that looks like a cluster of small blisters arose on most of an esrog. Such an esrog is puzzle because it doesn't meet the halachic standard of hodor. The Mishnah refers to a single chazazis. If there's a chazazis in 2 or 3 places, the esrog is no good, even if they cover only a minority of the surface, because the spatted appearance of such an esrog takes away the hodor of what it's supposed to look like. Nidla pitmasai, if it's pitim, the protrusion at the top of the fruit was removed. The esrog grew with a pitim and it was removed later. However, if it never had a pitim, it is valid without one. Many people have non-pitim esrogim, and that's perfectly fine. One year, the Meichrim were very busy with pitim insurance, that if you're up till Yantif, if your pitim falls off, they'll reimburse you with something like that. Niklaf. If the skin, the thin outer membrane was entirely peeled off, even if only the outer membrane was removed and the yellow skin of the esrog remained intact, it's no good. Without the protective membrane, it will soon dry or rot, and such an esrog is already considered not to possess beauty, but if some of the membrane remains, the esrog is valid because it will heal. Nisdak, if the esrog was split. Back to Niklach. So even if part of the thick layer of skin was removed and the inner white flesh of the esrog shows, the esrog is possible because it's chaser, which is it's missing a piece. It's missing a part of it. It's missing a piece of it, so that would make it no good. Nisdak, if it was split, the thick skin of the esrog is split all the way down one side. Even though no part of the esrog is actually missing, it's still considered a chisaron, still considered chaser. Nika b'chaser kol shehu pasel. If it has a hole and the slightest amount of the esrog is missing, it's still pasel. Here too, the reason for the disqualification is that the esrog is deficient. The Mishnah refers to a hole that doesn't go all the way through the esrog. If it does go all the way through, it would disqualify the esrog even if no part of the esrog is missing. For example, even if it was pierced by a needle. Also, chazazis al miyuta, if a chazazis arose on less than half of it, nital uktzai, or at the stem of the bottom, which was where it was attached to the tree was removed, Nika v'lo chaser kol shu, if it has a hole in it but nothing is missing, kasher, it's kasher. The Mishnah is referring to a hole that's not wider than an isser, which is according to those times, which is about 3 centimeters wide. If it is wider than an isser, it becomes possible even if nothing is missing, meaning that the skin, let's say, was just pushed in, and the hole doesn't go all the way through. So kasher, it's still kasher. Esrig hakushi pasul. A black esrig is pasul. Halacha applies only in places where black esrogim are uncommon. In a region where black esrogim is the normal color for esrogim, such that an esrig is kasher because it doesn't lack any hodar hayorik karsi. And this is the same halacha of an esrig that's green like a leek. Why? Which is similar to the color of grass, which is dark green. Rameir machshir Rabbi Yehuda pasul. Rameir says that it is kasher. Rabbi Yehuda says that it is not kosher because it's not fully developed. However, if the esrog is of a type that normally changes from green to yellow, as is the case with the esrogim that we use today, it may be used even when it's still very green because esrogim of this type are fully developed even at this stage. Mishnah Zayin. Shir esrog hakoton, the minimum size of an esrog. Rameir says that the esrog must be as large as a walnut. Rabbi Yehuda says it must be as large as an egg, because an esrog smaller than an egg is not fully developed. Uba Godel, what's the maximum size of an esrog? It must be small enough that a person can hold two of them in one hand to Rabbi Yehuda. As Rabbi Yehuda, the size is based on the halacha that one should hold the lulav bundle, the agad of the lulav together with hadasim and aravis in his right hand, and the esrog in his left. Since the right hand is more important than the left, it should hold the bundle of the 3 mitzvahs, while the left hand holds just 1 mitzvah. The Chachamim were concerned that when a person is handed the daled minim, he might receive the lulav in his left hand and the esrog in his right hand, requiring him to switch them from one hand to the other. In the process of switching, he would have to hold both in one hand for a moment. If the esrog is too large, he might drop it and damage it, making it possible. The Chacham therefore required that the esrog be small enough that one can safely hold the lulav bundle and the esrog in a single hand. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi says, even if it's so large that a person would need both of his hands to hold one, it's still kosher. Rabbi Yossi places no limit on how large the esrog may be. And over the years, we've seen many big ones, many small ones, many cute ones, many funny ones. Just a quick maisa. Famously, everyone knows the story of Reb Chaim Kanievsky and the grasshopper. Reb Chaim was learning, and Reb Chaim wrote a sefer called Karnei Chagavim, which goes through the halachas of grasshoppers. And he was sitting and learning in his house in Bnei Brak, and the window was open, and he was trying to understand something about one of these grasshoppers, and although these grasshoppers are not native to Bnei Brak, the grasshopper appeared on his windowsill, and he looked at it, and it flew away. Then he had another shaila, and it came back, and then it flew away when he was finished, looking at it. And Rav Michael Stern, in his sefer Eitzar Ideas, brings the story, and he says, if a person learns Torah Lishma, he has a lot of siyata d'shmaya, just like me. When I was writing my sefer on esrogim, he was the first one to put out colored pictures for him. His first one was Daled Minim. He's a Daled Minim expert in Yerushalayim. He went to Pardes, and he asked the farmer, can you show me, he gave him a list of all kinds of funny esrogim, and he asked the owner of the Pardes, can you show me these esrogim? The guy laughed at Ramechel, and he said, these esrogim, you look if you see them once every 70 years. Ramechel says, why does it hurt to take a look? So they went to look, and they saw all those esrogim were there. And he said the story about himself. Okay, Mishnah Ches. Ein oigdenes halulav ela b'minoi. We may not bind the lulav, hadasim, and aravas together except with parts of their own species, such as the stems, branches, and leaves. Devei Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the agad is part of the mitzvah of the daled minim, and so parts of these very species must be used. Rabbi Yehuda learns from the Torah that binding the lulav, hadasim, and aravas together is a big part of the mitzvah. Therefore, using something from a different species considered adding a 5th species to the mitzvah, which violates the Issa Daraisa of Baal Tosef. Rameir says, Afil b'mashicha, you could bind them together even with regular string or thread. Rameir holds that binding is done merely to make the species look more appealing to any materials. If for this purpose, use a rubber band, use whatever you want. Since the agad is only for decoration, the material used is not halachically relevant to the mitzvah of the daled minim. Rameir says, Ma'isa ba'anshe Yerushalayim, it happened with the men of Yerushalayim, Shahayu oigdenes lulveim b'gimonios shel zohav, that they would bind the lulavim, hadasim, and aravas together with bands of gold, and this shows that any type of material is acceptable. Amalei the Chacham said to Remeir to reject his raya. They bound the lulav together with the datzim and aravis with parts of their own species underneath the bands of gold. That is, they fulfilled the mitzvah of binding with parts of the four species, then put the bands of gold on top for decoration. Meaning like this: where do you have the isser of baltaisif? If you have an isser of baltaisif, if the thing you're using to tie it together is not from the is not mimini halulav, but if it is, and now if you put something on top of that, so then it's not going to be baltaisif. Yeah, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that its use is not considered adding to the mitzvah. Okay, we mentioned previously in the Akdama that there's a mitzvah to wave around to do the nanuim, to wave around the lulav and esrog. So this is what Mishnah Tes is going to tell us about. Included in the mitzvah of the Daled Minim is the act of waving them, which would be done when one first takes them to perform the mitzvah. One should also wave them during the recitation of certain psukim and halal. One waves the four species by extending them away from one's body and bringing them back. This is done 3 times in each of the 6 directions, 3 times in each direction of the compass, 3 times up and 3 times down. Waving them in the direction of the compass shows that we're asking Hashem to stop harmful winds that come from every direction. Waving them up and down shows that we're asking Hashem to stop harmful rains and dews, which forms up in the sky and falls down to the ground. Although one fulfills his ikr chiyuv of the mitzvah as soon as he picks them up, the proper way of performing the mitzvah is to wave them. The main requirement of nanuim applies when one initially takes the daled minim in his hand in order to fulfill the mitzvah, and the requirement to wave them during halal is a hoisafa midrabanan. At which point in halal do we wave the daled minim? The Tan is referring back to Mishnah Aleph, which we mentioned that we wave the lulav and the other minim. Continuing from there, the Tana asks when we wave them. So we're not just waking up and we're saying, "Oh, where do you wave them?" Right? Because we said in Mishnah Aleph, "Kalulav sheyesh by shleisha tvachim kedei l'naneya by." So a lulav needs to have 3 tvachim in order to be minaneya it. So now we're getting back to being minaneya it. So v'heichen hayu minanim. At which points in halal do we wave the daled minim? B'hoidu l'Hashem tchila v'seif. We wave them when reciting the psukim. Hoidu l'Hashem, beginning of the last kapitel of halal. And at the end of that capital, Uba Ana Hashem Aishiyana, and by Ana Hashem Aishiyana. Divrei Beis Hillel. This is what Beis Hillel says. Beis Shammai says, Af ba Ana Hashem Hatzlichana, even by Ana Hashem Hatzlichana, which is the next pasuk. The pasuk that Beis Hillel is talking about is just part of the pasuk, which reads in its entirety. Let's back up a little bit. Halal consists of the program of Tillim from Kuf Yud Gimel to Kuf Yud Ches, is recited on every day of Yom Tov and Chol Hamoed, as well as on other special occasions. The final capital, Kuf Yud Ches, begins and ends with the pasuk Hod L'Hashem Ki Tov Kileilim Chastai. The daled minim are waved during both recitations of this pasuk, at the beginning and at the end of the capital. Now we break it up differently. That's a shmuz in the Gemara. There's taisus about it. Why we break up the halal the way we break it up. The pasuk that Beis Hillel are referring to reads, Ana Hashem Mashiach, Ana Hashem Atzlichana, please Hashem save us now, please Hashem bring us success now. Nevertheless, Beis Hillel hold that we wave the daled minim only when reciting the first part of the pasuk and not the second part. The selection of all these psukim is based on a pasuk in Divrei Hayomim that says, Oz Yiranenu Atzeh Hayor, in Lefnei Hashem Kivol L'Shpoites Ha'oretz, Hoydul Hashem Ki Tov Kileilam Chazdai, Ve'imru Hoshenu L'Keishenu, which translates into, then the trees of the forest will sing joyously from before Hashem, because he will have come to judge the earth. Give thanks to Hashem, for he is good, for his kindness endures forever. Say, save us, Hashem, of our salvation. The Medrash says that after every person in the world is judged on Rosh Hashanah, we don't know who is innocent and who is found guilty. Therefore, Hashem gave this mitzvah to the Jewish people so that they will rejoice with the mitzvah of lulav like a person who the judge declares innocent. The pasuk is interpreted as follows: Oz Yiranenu Atzeh Hayor Milfnei Hashem Kivol L'Shpoites Ha'oretz. We will rejoice with the daled minim by waving them around, which are from the trees, after we have emerged innocent, after Hashem came L'Shpoites Ha'oretz. And then we'll say, Hodul Hashem Kitayv, Kileilam Chassid, V'imru Hoshenu L'Keishenu. So Hodul Hashem, and then Ana Hashem. Beis Hillel paskin that since the pasuk ends, V'imru Hoshenu L'Keishenu, it's similar to the pasuk Ana Hashem Mashiach, and there's no source for waving them when reciting the second half of the pasuk Ana Hashem Atzlichana. But Beis Hillel say even by Ana Hashem Atzlichana, because Beis Shammai hold that the pasuk that says Like doesn't mean to include only the first part of the pasuk Ana Hashem Atzlichana, but it's referring Ana Hashem Hashiana. But it's referring to and excluding Ana Hashem Atzlichana. Rather, it alludes to the entire pasuk, including the second part of Ana Hashem Atzlichana as well. Now, Lamaisa, what do? We do when we say this is Nusach Ashkenaz. What the way Nusach Ashkenaz does it is every time we say Hoidul Hashem in the beginning of that kapitel, and the Hoidul Hashem, which we do, Chazan and Kahal over there, the Baal Tefillah, sings and dances with his nanuim, and then we do it afterwards. Masha'en Nusach Sfard does Yemen Yisrael also. Nusach Ashkenaz doesn't shackled by Yemen Yisrael. We also do the nanuim by Hoidul Hashem Kitev at the end after Keleata. And we do by Ana Hashem Hoshiana, and not by Ana Hashem Atzlichana, like Beis Hillel. Rabbi Kiva says, Rabbi Yeshua. I was watching Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua when they recited Hallel with the Tzibur. I saw that all the people were waving their lulavim, not only when saying Ana Hashem Hoshiana, but also by Ana Hashem Atzlichana. Ve'hem le'ninu ela b'Ana Hashem Hoshiana. But Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua didn't wave their lulavim except when saying Ana Hashem Hoshiana, like Beis Hillel. So we see that Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua were noyeg like Beis Hillel and not like Beis Shammai. Misha Baba Derech. When we say lulav, we refer to all the daled minim. Misha Baba Derech lehay b'yadei lulav litoil. If someone was traveling on the road, and obviously it's not on Yontif, but it's talking about on Chol HaMoed, v'loy haya b'yadei lulav litoil, and he didn't have a lulav with him to take and perform the mitzvah. L'chshei l'beisai. When he enters his house, Yital HaShulchan, he should take the lulav even at his table, even in the middle of eating a meal. That is, if he forgot to take the daled minim before he started eating, he should do so as soon as he remembers, even in the middle of a meal. The halacha applies only when one does not have enough time to perform the mitzvah after the meal. The one who has enough time to do both may delay the mitzvah until after the meal, because taking the daled minim on Chol HaMoed is only a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, and the rule is the one need not interrupt the meal for a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. This halacha applies on Chol HaMoed. On Yom Tov, however, when taking the lulav as a chiyuv d'oraisa, one must not be eating as soon as he remembers, even if there's enough time to perform the mitzvah after the meal. Now, as a general rule, it's kedai to do all the mitzvahs right away. A lot of people. So, by us growing up, it was always that before Hallel, we went out to the sukkah, and we did not do in the sukkah, came inside for Hallel. However long that break took, anywhere between 5 minutes to 20 minutes. Now, many people, Nusach Svarad, a lot of people do nanuim, make the bracha, do nanuim before davening in the morning to show the chavivus of mitzvah to do it as early as possible. If one didn't take the lulav in the morning, he should take it in the afternoon, because the entire day is valid for the mitzvah of taking the lulav. The Torah says, bayom harishain means any time during the day. Mishnah Yud. Misha haya eved or isha or katan makrin oisai. Continuing the subject of halal, the Mishnah discusses the halacha is for someone who fulfills the mitzvah of reciting a halal with the help of another person. Generally, a person can fulfill another mitzvah that entails reciting a text, such as halal, shema, or mikra megillah, without actually saying the words, by just listening to somebody else say it for him, which is called shemea ka'ina. One who hears is like one who responds. The halacha, however, applies only when the person reading is also mechuyev in the mitzvah. So, misha haya eved isha katan makrin oisai. If someone had a Eved Kanani, or a woman, or a katan recite the halal for him because he doesn't know how to recite it himself, he must repeat after them what they say. Since these readers are not obligated to recite halal, Nashim and Avodim are not mechuyev to say halal because it's a mitzvah sasesha as man grama, and Ketanim are not mechuyev in any mitzvahs really. So he cannot fulfill his chiyuv by merely listening to them. Rather, he must say each word after them. In this way, he actually says the entire halal by himself, and the reader is guiding him what to say. Utehilai me'era. And let a curse be upon him, because he didn't learn how to say halal by himself. It's a big problem. A person doesn't know how to read. It's very hard to do Yiddishkeit properly by not being able to read. I was one time sitting in a Beis Medrash and I heard two Bachrim learning this Mishnah. I actually think they were using ArtScroll, and one of them says, "Tawiloi me'era, tehiloi me'era." A light should come to him. I was thinking to myself, oy vey, how does he? It's talking about somebody who doesn't know how to read, and this person he knows how to read, but he doesn't know how to touch. But I have something. Obviously, Meira over here means curse, doesn't mean a light, but he's saying like a tefillah, a light should come to that person to be able to read it properly. I don't know. However, if you had a Jewish adult male recited for him, of hallelujah, he responds after him, hallelujah, meaning that he says hallelujah after each pasuk. In this case, he can indeed fulfill his obligation by listening, because the reader is also machuyev. Although the listener should respond hallelujah at the end of each pasuk, he fulfills his chiyuv even if he didn't do so, because the listening is essential, not the response. And he's not cursed, because it's a standard practice for one man to recite Hallel on behalf of another. In those times, one man would recite Hallel in the shul on behalf of everybody else, even those who knew how to say Hallel themselves. Maybe Kedei, Shalei Levayish, as those that don't know how to say it, which is a big shmuz. It's very interesting how Shamei Ka'ina works. Mishnah Yud Aleph. Mokem shenagu lichpol yichpol, in a place where the people follow the custom to repeat each of the last 9 verses of the last kapitel of Hallel, one should follow the custom and repeat these verses. There are 29 psukim in the last kapitel of Hallel Kuf Yud Ches. The first 20 follow a repetitive pattern. For example, Tevilachsis B'Hashem Ibteich B'Adam, Tevilachsis B'Hashem Ibteich B'Nedivim. It's better to take refuge in Hashem than to rely on man. It's better to take refuge in Hashem than to rely on nobles. In order to maintain this pattern, there was a minhag in some communities to repeat each of the last 9 psukim, which begin Oidcha Kani Sani. And we will say over the joke that we heard from Rabbi Yonason many, many times on Pesach and on Sukkot. In the old Sidurim, it didn't spell out the whole pasuk of Oidcha, let's say, but it would say in small letters at the end of the pasuk Oidcha, and people would, so they came back a few hours later. The person was still saying the Oidcha again and again and again. He never moved on from that. Livshait, Yivshait. And in a place where the custom is to say each of the psukim only once, he should follow the custom and say them only once. Levarich acharav, yivarich acharav. In a place where the custom is to recite the bracha after Hallel, one should follow the minhag and recite the bracha after Hallel. Kol k'minhag hamedina, everything should be done in accordance with the local custom. There's a bracha that begins Yahalalucha. The recitation of this bracha at the end of Hallel is not a chiyuv, but depends on the minhag. The bracha before Hallel, however, is a chiyuv like any other birkas hamitzvos, and it's not a matter of custom. There's many different minhagim when it comes to Hallel, befrat between Nusach Ashkenaz and they do the Mizrach, and there's a big taisus and brachas and daf Yudalad that goes through the different things. Because if a Hallel is really only a minhag, then why are we making a bracha on it? Especially since we're not saying Hallel Shalom most of the time. In Sukkot we say Hallel Shalom. On Rosh Chodesh, on the last days of Pesach, we don't say Hallel Shalom. We only say Chatzi Hallel. So it'd be very strange to make a bracha on something that we're not saying, that we're not doing fully. So that's why Achenu Hasfardim don't. Halekeach lulav mechavere b'shvius. If one buys a lulav, or any of the daled minim, from his friend who's an Amoretz, who cannot be trusted to observe certain halachas during Shvius, every 7th year the land in Eretz Yisrael may not be worked, and this year is called Shvius or Shemitah. Noisen le esrig b'matona. The buyer must insist that the seller give an esrig as a gift. If the Amoretz doesn't want to give the esrig to him as a gift, the buyer may pay extra for the other species. Because he's not allowed to buy it during Shemitah. An esrig that grew during Shvius is Kaddish, B'Kedusha Shvius, and any money paid to buy it becomes Kaddish, must be treated in a certain way, as discussed by Arichas Masechta Shvius. The Rabbanon therefore answered buying an esrig of Shvius from an Amoretz, because the Amoretz might not treat the money as he should. Now, when I was in Eretz Yisrael, I was there in the Shminis. I was actually there in Shvius too, but the first Sukkot that I was there was Shminis, and there was a lot of stickers on a lot of the lulavim that it's not gemechta shvius. A lulav doesn't have kedusha shvius because it's not edible, and that was by a rav that was making jokes about it. An esrig that, a produce that grows during shvius is kaddish and may only be eaten and not sold or wasted. It is also subject to the laws of beer. The one must give up his ownership of the product when the species is no longer available in the fields. If one sells shvius produce, the produce retains its kedusha, and the money paid for it becomes kaddish as well. The money may be used only for buying food, which must also be treated like shvius produce. And Amoretz, who doesn't know the halachas, might use the money for some other purpose, or if he does use it to buy food, he might not treat the food as the halacha requires. To prevent these isurim, the Chachamim forbade one to buy shvius produce from an Amoretz. The Mishnah specifies the esrog because the lulav hadatzim and aravis are just pieces of wood which don't have any kedusha shvius on it anyways. Okay, Mishnah Yud Beis. Barishayna hayalulav nitl b'mikdash shiva. Originally, when the Beis Hamikdash stood, the lulav was taken in the Beis Hamikdash on all 7 days of Sukkot, b'Medina Yom Echad, and in the provinces, meaning outside the Beis Hamikdash, it was taken only on one day, which was the first day of Sukkot, as we mentioned in the Hakdama. Mishachara Beis Hamikdash, when the second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, his skin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, sheyehei lulav nitl b'Medina shiva zeichel hamikdash. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted that the lulav be taken even in the other areas of Eretz Yisrael on all 7 days of Sukkot in commemoration of what was done in the Mikdash. That is, on all 7 days of Sukkot except for Shabbos, and the Chachamim forbade taking the Dalet Minim out of concern the one I carry them in the Rishus Rabbim, which would be Aser on Shabbos. Yom Henef Kuloi Aser. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai also issued a decree at that time regarding the Isser Deraisa against eating Chodosh before the Karban Omer. The Karban Omer was a mincha offering that consisted of barley of the new crop, which must be offered on the second day of Pesach, the 16th of Nisan, which is brought in the Beis Hamikdash on the second day of Pesach. The Isra of eating from the new Chodosh is said in the pasuk V'lechem v'koli v'charmel lo yisochlu et etzem hayom hazeh ad haviachem es karban elikechem. You shall not eat bread or roasted kernels or plump kernels until this very day, which is the second day of Pesach, until you bring the offering of your God, of Hashem, the Karban Omer. So, although Midairaisa, the new crop is permitted as soon as the Karban Omer is brought, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai established what must be done after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed and the Omer offering was no longer brought. So he decreed that the new crop is forbidden the entire day of waving, which means the Yom Henef, the entire second day of Pesach, when the Karban Omer was used to be waved in the Beis Hamikdash. The Omer offering has to be waved in 4 directions of the compass. Therefore, it's called Omer HaTanufa, the Omer of waving. And the day in which it was brought was called Yom HaNivchem Es HaOmer. It's very interesting. We don't have this Bisman HaZav B'Niseinu Rabbim. But there was Tanufa to a lot of things similar to the Nanuim that we do on Sukkot. In the absence of the Beis Hamikdash, when the Karban Omer is not brought, so Midaraisa, you could already eat the new crop early in the morning of the 16th of Nisan. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, though, decreed that it remains also until the night after the 16th. He was concerned that if the Jewish people would be allowed to eat the new crop early in the morning of the 16th, they might continue to do so even after the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt. That would be an Isser Deraisa, because when the Beis Hamikdash is standing, the new crop is Aser until after the Omer is offered. To prevent this Isser, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai decreed that one may not eat the new grain until the end of the day, by which time the Omer offering will certainly have been brought when the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt. Sagt der Mishnah weiter, Mishnah Yud Gimel, Yom Tov Rishon Shal Chag Shechal Yes B'Shabbos, when the Beis Hamikdash stood, the mitzvah of Dalet Mina was observed on the first day of Sukkot, even when it fell on Shabbos, both inside and outside the Beis Hamikdash. The Chachamim were goyzer that the mitzvah may not be observed on Shabbos, even in the Beis Hamikdash, because someone might desecrate Shabbos by carrying a Dalet Amos B'Rishus Rabbin. However, they did not apply this decree when the first day of Sukkot fell on Shabbos. It's different if it's the first day or a different day. However, carrying this Dalet Minim in a Rishus Rabbim on Shabbos is also Midaraisa. The Mishnah describes how this transgression was avoided outside the Beis Hamikdash. Later on in Parak Dalet, we'll explain how the mitzvah was observed on Shabbos in the Beis Hamikdash. So Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag Shechal Yes B'Shabbos, on the first day of Yom Tov of Sukkot, which fell out on Shabbos, Chag Stam refers to Sukkot, as we know from the Psukim and Chumash. The people would bring their lulavim to the shul before Shabbos because it's also to carry them in the street on Shabbos. They brought the Dalet Minim to the shul rather than fulfill the mitzvah at home, so that they'll be able to wave them when they recite Hallel with the tzibur. And the next day on Shabbos they would come to the shul early in the morning. Each one would recognize his own lulav and take it to perform the mitzvah. Everyone had to use his own lulav but not to borrow someone else's with the owner's permission. So you had to come early, even though Shabbos, la person can wake up late and daven later, but they would have to wake up early to make sure that they figure out the lulavim before they start davening. Or maybe they would take, like you said before, there's a minhag that some people take the lulav before davening dafka. Each one would recognize his own lulav and take it to perform the mitzvah, because it has to be his. Because the Chachamim say that a person cannot fulfill his chiyuv on the first day of Sukkot with the lulav of his friend. On the other days of Sukkot, however, a person can fulfill his obligation with the lulav of his friend. The din d'oraisa requiring lechem is only on the first day and not on any other days. And the Chacham over here, Menesha Amr Chachamim, it doesn't mean that it's a Din D'Rabbanan, but it means that the Chachamim are explaining the Din D'Oraisa. Mishnah Yodal. Rabbi Yosi Eimer, Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag Shechal Yes B'Shabbos. As we mentioned in the previous Mishnah, B'Zman Shabbos HaMikdash Kayam, the mitzvah of Daled Minim on the first day of Sukkot is applied even on Shabbos. So the Mishnah discusses the halach of someone who mistakenly carried them in a Rishus Rabbim on Shabbos. Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag Shechal Yes B'Shabbos V'Shochach V'Hoitzis Halul of Rishus Rabbim Potter. One who forgot that it was Shabbos, or forgot that carrying was also on Shabbos, and he carried the lulav out of Rishus Yochin into Rishus Rabbim in order to be Mekayim the mitzvah. He carried them to shul to do the mitzvah there, let's say. So then Potter, he's not mechuyev to bring a chatas. It's not considered a real chilul Shabbos, because he carried it with permission. That means he carried it for the sake of the mitzvah. Although it was also midiraisa for him to carry it even for this purpose, Rabbi Yosi holds that one who mistakenly is machal Shabbos because he's busy with the mitzvah does not have to bring a korban chatas. Rabbi Yosi's words with permission are not meant literally, because in fact carrying the daled minim in a Rishus Rabbim on Shabbos is also midiraisa, even if he needs to do so l'shem mitzvah. Rather, Rabbi Yosi's point is that it was a person's preoccupation with the mitzvah, which is otherwise obligatory, that caused him to forget that that day is Shabbos. Even according to Rabbi Yosi, a person who carries the daled minim after performing the mitzvah is mechuyev to bring a chatas, since he's no longer busy with the mitzvah. This leads to a problem, however, because as soon as one picks up the daled minim midiraisa, he's yaitse. So any time he's carrying it is already after the mitzvah. So why then does Rabbi Yosi rule that he doesn't need to bring a chatas for carrying them outside? El al karchach, we must say that the Mishnah refers to a person who picked them up in a way that he wasn't able to fulfill the chiyuv. For example, they were upside down, or they were in a box. So when he took them outside, he was still occupied with the mitzvah. Mishnah Tezvav, the final Mishnah in the parak. Mekabelas isha miyad beno umiyad baila umachzirasa ilamayim b'Shabbos. A woman may receive the lulav from the hand of her son or from the hand of her husband after he performed the mitzvah with it. Generally, anything that's not a food utensil is muktzah on Shabbos and Yontif, a lulav which is just a branch of a tree or to be included in the Isser of muktzah. If so, only men who are mechuyev to perform the mitzvah of daled minim should be allowed to move a lulav on Shabbos and Yontif, but women who are not mechuyev should be also to move it. The Mishnah teaches that this is not true. Rather, since a lulav may be used by a man for the sake of the mitzvah, as the halachic status of a keli, and as such may be moved by anybody. And then the next halacha is umachziros elamayim b'Shabbos. He may put it back in the water on Shabbos to keep it fyesh. If the lulav was on water and then taken out on Shabbos, may be put back. But we may not put it in water lechatchila on Shabbos. The Mishnah refers to the time of the Beis Hamikdash when the mitzvah of the daled minim was performed on Shabbos as well, if it was on the first day of Sukkot. Nowadays, when the mitzvah of the daled minim may not be observed on Shabbos, the lulav, hadasim, and aravas are indeed muktzah to everyone, including men. The esrog, however, is not muktzah at all because people use it to smell its fragrance. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'Shabbos machzirin, b'Yom Tov machsifin, u'b'moed machlifin. B'Shabbos machzirin, on Shabbos we may put it back into the water, but we may not add water. One may not add water to the container because that would be an effort for the purpose of repairing a utensil, which would be fixing the lulav. Since water preserves the moisture of the lulav, adding water somewhat resembles the act of repairing a utensil, which is usher on Shabbos. Nevertheless, adding water is forbidden only because some effort is involved. Simply putting the lulav back in the water, which requires no effort, is mutter. B'Yom Tov ma'asifin, on Yom Tov may add water, but may not change the water. Despite the fact that adding water involves some effort, it's permitted to do it on Yom Tov. Although this act is also on Shabbos, it's mutter on Yom Tov because halachas are less strict than those of Shabbos. Changing the water, however, requires more effort than adding water, and it's forbidden even on Yom Tov. U'b'moed machlifin, and on Chol Hamoed you may change the water. In fact, it's a mitzvah to change the water on Chol Hamoed in order to keep the lulav fresh. Katan hayodea l'naneya chayev b'lulav. The last halach in the parak is a minor who is old enough to know how to wave the lulav. As we described in Mishnah Tes, is mechuyev to perform the mitzvah of lulav. That is, his father is rabbinically obligated to train him to perform the mitzvah of the daled minim. Ad kan.